Hello and welcome to Push Your Glasses Up. I'm Mikey. It's a little bit different on this episode. I didn't have a guest lined up for this one. Where I'm going to talk a little bit about Ghostbusters Frozen Empire, and I just wanted to share my thoughts on it, even though I didn't have somebody to converse with about it. So, a little bit different format. Probably going to be a lot shorter since it's not a back and forth of setting ideas off. But yeah, I wanted to get into this because I let me put it out there. I enjoyed this movie. I use that word specifically because I don't think it's a great movie. I do think it is a fun and enjoyable movie specifically, and I say that because it's very specific to me. Because this movie has a lot of the Real Ghostbusters energy, the cartoon from the 80s that was in between both the original and Ghostbusters 2 in 89. It feels like a long episode of that show to me, from overall vibe and tone to the design of a lot of the ghosts that you're seeing come up. I just think it's a weird situation because it's not going to line up for people who like the original movie and only like the original movie. It's not going to line up with Afterlife all that much because it's also like very different in vibe to that. So it's a bit bizarre. I mean, Ghostbusters 2 is pretty different in tone from the first movie, but it aligns fairly well, 1 to 2. But it's one of those things where it is a terrific beat the heat summer style movie, but it came out in March, so it's a little strange to have that vibe going with when it came out. But yeah, I am a fan of this movie. It doesn't, like, the original is obviously like a legendary movie, and I think Afterlife does a really good job of capturing a little bit of that, but also it leans a lot on the nostalgia of like a love for that and a reverence for that more than being more of that. And then this one just kind of in the movie universe is its own thing. But yeah, it's listen, I was born in 84. So by the time I was 2, I was watching the Real Ghostbusters cartoon. That was my introduction to the Ghostbusters, to the point where my daycare, which was in like the basement of a church in Lexington, Massachusetts, I stole a Marshmallow Man toy that was about this big, and I carried it around like a teddy bear for a couple years. Like, that was basically my teddy bear. And then I became like a, ecto cooler kid and what have you. But that cartoon was right up there with Ninja Turtles for me when I was a kid. It's a big deal cartoon for me. And so, like, going into Ghostbusters 2, when I first saw Ghostbusters 2, it was a little strange because I was going from the cartoon to like, oh, it's going to be the Real Ghostbusters, the movie. And it very much wasn't. It was, a kidsy version of the first Ghostbusters. It's not a great movie in general, but that, when I was a kid, certainly turned me off even more than just it being not as good as the first movie. But I really like the direction that this movie went with leaning into the Real Ghostbusters. But again, I don't know how that works for everybody. So I understand that it's not exactly gonna be the best situation for everyone going into this movie, since it is, basically a long episode of that show. That being said, stuff that's a little more specific, I think there's rough stuff in this movie. There's pacing issues, editing issues. I'm really bummed out because the Patton Oswalt bit, who I'm a huge fan of, been a fan of his stand-up for an extremely long time, let alone his acting and stuff. But his scene at the library is an expository dump that feels like it lasts about 7 minutes. And that's long. That is a long time to wait. And when you're just narrating over like an animation of stonework moving to make it look like, you know, cave carvings are coming to life, in the middle of the movie, it kind of takes a little bit of a dip. It really slows things down and resets when this movie needs to be pushing forward, because there's too many storylines. There's too many characters. They really should be focusing more and more on the Spengler family. It's like, especially with Phoebe, like she is the main character of these new movies, and so that we really need to be focusing on that. But we have things like, you know, Ernie Hudson and Dan Aykroyd arguing with one another about how Ray wants to still be doing the busting. He still wants to be one of the Ghostbusters, and Ernie Hudson is like, no, you're too old, you're gonna get hurt, you're gonna hurt other people, blah blah blah. And then I would say that takes about 10 minutes of the movie away from the main characters, which is kind of frustrating. And then like the tertiary characters, like, you can only go so far to explain why Podcast and Lucky are both there from Oklahoma. Like they're somehow all coming together again. So there's just so many characters that didn't need to be there. I did like, I can't remember the character's name off the top of my head. I did like the guy that looked like cartoon Egon in the actual research department for the Ghostbusters. I think he did a great job being that kind of dry but sardonic foil for everyone else's shenanigans. And then I think they did a really good job with the actual, like, I think they could have done a better job focusing on the character, but I liked the weird and silly story with Phoebe and Melody. And something they could have gone a little further with is the why Phoebe wants to be a ghost, and why she says, like, do you ever think about what it would be like to be a ghost and whatever. I like the idea of it because they could connect it to Egon a lot. They could like really hammer home that's why, because she's feeling disconnected and feeling alone, especially since she's been sidelined by William Atherton's now mayor. So she can't actually be part of the team, part of the family out in the streets and whatnot. So she's feeling isolated. And the whole reason she's feeling that or pulling that quandary up of like, what would it be like to be a ghost, is because Egon made her feel like she belonged. And so I think they could have done a better job leaning into that. I will say I think they did an okay job leaning into it, because I think the relationship that builds with her and Melody is somewhat interesting, although it doesn't fully hit in the end, because the reveal of there's going to be full spoilers here. The reveal of Melody's match was set up very obviously in the beginning of the movie, or at least like a quarter of the way into the movie. The turn could have been better. The betrayal felt a little forced, and then the hero turn after the betrayal felt extremely forced. And I think that could have been a little bit better. But the setup to them connecting, I think, was good. The setup with the chessboard, where she actually like kind of hopes that it's Egon playing with her before Melody reveals herself. And she's kind of like bummed out afterwards that it's not him. And then the sort of like first time bringing somebody to your house and just kind of like showing them the stuff in your room when you're a teenager. I think that all worked really well. But you know, the payoff on some of it could have been a little bit better. I also think the stuff like the Finn Wolfhard, like the Trevor and Slimer stuff, I think is so perfectly fitting for the fact that they did basically like an episode of the old cartoon, in that the Slimer stuff is like a B, or I guess a C story, because there's like the Ray and Ernie Hudson stuff. I think some people aren't in love with this from what I've seen. I think it's fun. I think it's really dumb and fun to just have Slimer become the firehouse dog, just like in the cartoon. And like by the end of it, where they have this back and forth of Trevor trying to capture Slimer and Slimer getting away and whatnot. And at the end, the like Slimer incidentally kind of saves the moment. And Trevor's like, oh, I know that guy. Like, I like how that worked. I just think it's perfect for the fact that they are doing the cartoon in a movie. But on top of that, I think there's back and forth with how I feel about the Paul Rudd situation in this movie. He's fun for sure. I don't know how much I love that they lean into not the reverence for Ghostbusters, but just the like, hey, look at this, remember this kind of nostalgia. You know, they show a lot of the toys from back in the day in the 80s and 90s off, which is one of those things where it's always a tough time to like accept the things from my world are now an in-universe thing retroactively. It's just a little bit strange to deal with that. But the way that Paul Rudd then starts singing the song, and they explain why this is all in universe, but like when he's just sort of like talking through the lyrics of the song, the Bustin', it makes me feel good. Like it works in one way, but it's another heavy-handed thing for me as well. But I still just find myself coming back to the idea that like I like this movie, like with all the problems that it has. It's the thing that I wanted Ghostbusters 2 to be when I was a kid. And that's something that's like, it's hard to convey like just a feeling of finally, but it's a thing that I appreciate a great deal. Just because, you know, there's the third act of this movie isn't great. It's rushed. It's Kumail is very fun in this movie, but it's another character that's just like, do we need another character in this? We have so many people helping the Ghostbusters at this point, that it becomes a little bit of a problem in the final act of this movie. There's just so many people, and then like they take away the edge from this movie a lot, because like in the trailers there's so much reshoot stuff in this final act. You have like Lucky getting frozen, like her eyes freeze up, you can see it in this movie. She just kind of like gets a little freezer burned, and then everybody at the end of this movie, like I guess they're just not really like fully getting frozen. They just have like spiky ice pointing at them to keep them in place, and it's strange decisions that I would assume are just to make it a little more family friendly, because I do think this is scarier than a family movie would generally get, so maybe they had to pull back on some of that other stuff to make it a little more kid friendly. But yeah, I like this direction for Ghostbusters. I think it is the right call to lean into this, like, hey, they're actually like busting ghosts. That's an important part of the Ghostbusters. So I really love that they're leaning into the cartoon so much. It is my favorite part of this movie. And hopefully, you know, it's not off to the biggest box office of all time, but it did better than Afterlife. But that's also, you know, you got Afterlife had pandemic box office to deal with. But, you know, I think that this could be the right direction to make it more of a kid adventure movie that's like a little bit spooky. Like I think that's the right call in the long run, even if it's not a perfect display of that out of the gates. But yeah. Hey, if you enjoyed, I guess, this different format, first of all, but if you enjoy the podcast or the trailer reactions or anything like that, like the videos on YouTube, subscribe to the channel. If you like the podcast in audio only format, you can do that too, and get us anywhere you like. that'll do it. Let me know in the comments below if how you felt about Ghostbusters, Frozen. I almost said Afterlife, Frozen Empire. And until next time.